Welcome to the All Access Podcast from the experts at Tebis. Each episode, we'll talk about technology topics, trends, or solutions that manufacturers need to know in today's rapidly evolving times. Sit back, enjoy the discussion, and let us know what you think.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to the All Access Podcast. I am your host, Michael Thiessen, and this podcast is bringing you all the information and forecasts and outlook that in the manufacturing world that we operate in, that we desire to have this information to kind of help us out, seeing what you might need to do in your manufacturing environments. Uh, and get information that you normally wouldn't get. So that's what this podcast here is going to be all about. And if you listen to some of the other podcasts that we've had happening over the last several months here, we've had AIEM, Tony Vernassi there, which is the Aerospace Industry of Michigan, the association. Then we had the automotive forecast. And today we have something very special going on. Today, we're talking about not the automotive forecast, but more focusing on the aerospace forecast to see how is that industry doing and potentially what kind of an impact can this industry do on your manufacturing needs and maybe diversify, give you the information to diversify and look into that industry. Obviously, you don't want to go into an industry where there's not much going on, there's not a lot of work available for you, but hopefully today it opens up your eyes of what the aerospace industry can provide to potentially your business and maybe even your bottom line. Of course, you don't get that information from me. You get that from one of our extinguished guests that we usually have on the show. On today's guest, when I researched a little bit about this individual, one word came to my mind when I looked at his resume, so to speak, and that one word was wow. So the individual that we're talking about is a partner and a principal at the AeroDynamic Advisory, which is an aerospace consulting firm that deals with the aviation and multiple aerospace companies, the tier ones, as well as the direct OEMs. And they are providing business and corporate strategies in regards to their market and technology. Now, the individual that we're talking to, he's incredibly passionate about aerospace. I mean, otherwise, he would not be in that particular position. He started flying lessons at age 12. So he's been doing this for a while. He's not 13 years old. No, he's up there because he became a commercial pilot at 19 and earned a degree in aerospace engineering, which is what I started with initially. He had 10 years of consulting experience overseas at the aerodynamics aftermarket areas. And the person that we're talking to is the partner at the AeroDynamic Advisory, Mr. Mike Stengel. Mike, welcome to the All Access Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I was absolutely honest when I looked at your resume, just those few lines that I received from my staff here, it was wow. Getting a flying lessons at age 12, having your commercial airlines pilot at 19, you must be really an aerospace geek, so to speak.
I'm pretty sure that's exactly what it says on my LinkedIn profile. And yeah, by the way, on my first flying lesson, I was so short I had to sit on a pillow to see over the dashboard on the plane.
Oh, that is awesome. We're really excited to have you on this podcast, especially looking at an industry that is very close and dear to my heart. Um, as many of you guys know, I work at Tebis. I'm the sales manager at this particular company. We deal mostly in the automotive as well as in the aerospace industry. But on a personal side, I started in the aerospace engineering field. My first year was at Ryerson Technology University in Toronto that I was part of on that first year. And then I moved to Grand Rapids and became mechanical engineering and moved away from that aerospace. But you really took it to the nth degree. Not only did you graduate with the aerospace engineering in the aerospace engineering field, but also you're a distinguished pilot, commercial pilot, and now you're working as a consultant for the AeroDynamic Advisory. So tell me a little bit of what is the aerospace advisory that you guys are dealing with, and what does that entail?
Sure. So yeah, our firm is a boutique firm. We're solely focused on the aerospace industry. There are plenty of other consulting firms that will focus across a broad variety of industries, but we're more focused, and a lot of our staff have industry experience. Even some of our entry level analysts, they'll have previous internship experience at the OEMs or elsewhere in the industry. And I'd say I describe the three types of projects as this: market and technology assessment, which is kind of telling clients just kind of the general landscape of a market segment or a technology and giving them the outlook on those. Then the other type is business strategy, which is kind of the next step after you do market and technology assessment. It's like, okay,
Right.
what do I do about it? And then the third type is transaction support, where we conduct buy and sell side diligence of companies that are being bought or sold in the aerospace industry. There's a lot of private equity activity in the space. So we count many of them as our clients too.
I have to assume how busy the aerospace industry is, that you must be incredibly busy and trying to keep up with everything that's going on in the aerospace, in the aero and space environment.
Absolutely. I mean, it's in the name of our firm, AeroDynamic, right? It's a dynamic industry. And even though you don't see a new aircraft produced that coming out that often, not like you do in automotive, there is plenty to stay on top of. That keeps the industry very interesting, and why it devotes, we think, dedicated expertise and a firm dedicated to this industry. Just what's happened so far this year, I'm sure we'll cover some of it, but even just the impact, the consequences and implications of what has been announced in geopolitics, that has downstream effects on our industry.
Of course.
Those are all things we have to take into account as we form our forecasts and advise our clients.
So let me elaborate on this, or just ask a follow-up question on this, since you already mentioned this. How is the aerospace industry in the U.S., or maybe I should say in North America, because of course I have to include Canada in there, into this entire mix there as well. How is that industry doing?
Yeah. So we look at it through, let's focus maybe on just commercial transport, right? Airliners.
Right.
When you look at it from an air travel demand perspective, going into this year, it was very healthy. There were, if anything, airlines are seeing more premium demand. Delta Airlines and United have been talking about increasing their exposure to premium, adding business class seats, leaning more on credit card revenue, adding premium economy, things like that. So that the air travel demand is healthy. Aircraft demand is healthy. There's a backlog today of 17,000 aircraft at the major manufacturers that's stretching out over the next 8 to 9 years.
Wow.
But that in itself highlights the main issue of the industry, which is aircraft supply. There are just a lot of deep-rooted constraints in the supply chain today, a lot of knots to untangle. I call it a game of whack-a-mole, because as soon as you solve one issue, another one pops up. And it's going to be, we think, a long road to get back to where we were before the pandemic.
Right. And I mean, there's last year at least, we saw there was a lot of hype going on at Boeing, with, of course, one situation led to another. Then the CEO resigned or was removed, or now a new CEO is in place. How is Boeing getting out of this? I mean, do we see that there is an upward trend again, where the new CEO has made quite a bit of changes, and there's this trust built up again that Boeing, I mean, they're one of the leaders when it comes to the commercial airline environment?
Yeah, barring any other exogenous events that we can't imagine right now, I think the worst is behind Boeing. The strike is behind them. The leadership changes behind them. There could be a few more leadership changes coming up. Maybe Kelly Ortberg wants to have some new of its C-suite, to work with. And their their main goal is to recover on their 737 MAX production and to
Right.
get the 737 MAX 7 and MAX 10 certified, as well as
Hmm.
the 777X. So that those goals are keeping their hands full. And it's probably a reason why they're not going to launch another new aircraft, a clean sheet at least, for a while.
Right.
They'll that they have to be focused on achieving those goals first.
Right. So the two big main aircraft OEMs, I think that we're dealing with, would you say is Airbus and Boeing, or are there more players in play?
It's largely a duopoly with Airbus and Boeing. I'd say emerging is Comac out in China, although the aircraft they're producing, the C919, which is narrow body, I'd say close equivalent to the 737 A320, maybe a generation behind in its technology aside from the engine. But it's not getting a lot of attention outside of China, and Chinese government kind of using it as a tool to influence their use it as political influence abroad and
Right.
to encourage sales with who they would consider their allies.
Right. Right. Now, would you say that the current industry in the aerospace world, that you're dealing with certain challenges that you need to overcome, or is the aerospace industry challenge free? Let's say.
Definitely not challenge free. Like I said, supply chain is everyone's number one concern today, and
Right.
it's just to the point where um, you know suppliers that work with Airbus or Boeing, they're handed a forecast from them
Hmm.
saying this is how many aircraft we expect to produce in the next 3 to 5 years, and that is supposed to determine how their suppliers prepare, invest, and gear up, right?
Hmm.
But there's just a lot of skepticism of those outlooks on how
Hmm.
they plan to achieve those rates. Um, there were a lot of suppliers that left the industry during COVID, and when they have moved on to another industry, it's hard to draw them back. Or if they did remain, they're just being extra cautious.
Right.
And a lot of the investment that these suppliers have to make is at risk.
Hmm.
So if you're a machine shop or something and you need to invest now for a ramp up that occurs over the next 3 years, well, in the back of those owners' minds, it's, well, what if another COVID like event happens and then I'm caught with my tail between my legs?
Right.
So that's the main concern. And I'd, I'd say another big concern is labor, skilled labor.
Uh-huh.
Um, again, a lot of early retirements occurred during COVID. There was a loss of institutional knowledge in some parts of the industry. I think that probably affected Boeing's ability to deal with all the challenges they faced over the last few
Hmm.
years. And again,
How do companies deal with that, Mike? If I mean, we're seeing this in the automotive industry as well as in the aerospace industry, where the intellectual individuals that have been with the company for 20, 30 years and really have the experience underneath their fingernails, how do we replace that experience, or what do companies do in order to retain the know-how and the knowledge and transfer it downstream?
yeah. So if you're talking at shop level and technicians,
Yeah.
we've seen this in from everywhere from airlines to maintenance providers to manufacturers. They're having to go back further, earlier in the training pipeline and recruitment pipeline to start telling people about opportunities in the aerospace industry. That's something we're working on at Aerospace Industry Association Michigan. It's
Yeah.
I think it's partly a lack of awareness of the opportunities to be had, and that this being a technician or working in a machine shop today is nothing like maybe what your perceptions are, which might be more from like 30 or 40 years ago when it
Hmm.
was less sophisticated, maybe a little dirtier work, right?
Hmm.
And today you're working in a lot more smart factories, and it's a very different skill set. So we
Hmm.
see people going back all the way to high school and middle schools to start kind of planting that seed in their heads, and then then the trick is to keep reminding them until they get old enough, right? But
Right.
planting that seed early may encourage people to go down that path of working more into towards these types
Right.
of trades and roles.
From your vantage point, do you see an excitement with the younger generation in the aero and the space environment?
Increasingly, yes, absolutely. And we have a couple programs going on at AIM that we're addressing just that, and there is a lot of excitement. I go around to give lectures, guest lectures at a couple universities a year, and there's a lot of excitement about the future of the industry, and they're very open, wide-eyed about the issues that the industry faces too. About sustainability and maybe challenging geopolitical environment, but nonetheless, they're eager to kind of tackle those.
Yeah. I mean, I guarantee most individuals over the last week, or I should say, well, it's almost now 2 weeks ago, were probably glued to their television set and watching the return of these astronauts back from the International Space Station with the Dragonfly and SpaceX as they come down. I know I watched it, and I was excited to see how everything came to happen, how they landed, and how safely everything was. It was exciting to see that, and I can just imagine some youngster looking at that, because you don't see that very often, that we go to outer space and come back again, or as these individuals were stuck for almost a year up in space and then took this ride all the way down there. So I bet you a lot of the young kids are saying, well, how can I do this? And I've been now with AIM for a couple of years, and it's exciting to see how AIM gets really the word out to a lot of the colleges, the high school levels, and even having Dick DeVos on in the last conference of what is being done in Grand Rapids with that particular aerospace structure, what he's doing to help that particular industry. It's exciting to see that youngsters are taking that lead.
Absolutely. And space has always been, one part of the aerospace industry that's a really good way to grab the attention of young people looking at their options. Even going back to the space age, right? It always captured people's imaginations. And
Right.
I think sometimes people look at commercial airliners and think that's maybe a little bit more boring or whatever, but there's a host of other challenges that those segments of the industry face as well.
I agree with you. I think space is in a industry, of course, in the aerospace sector, where there's excitement. I mean, every single time Blue Origin goes up or Virgin goes up in space and takes these privateers into space, even if it's just for a few minutes, it's being highlighted as a great experience. It almost the commercial airline, or just the airline industry, is almost in the shadow of space, because there's such an excitement there when it comes to that.
Yeah, exactly. Even though the fleet of airliners is, over 30,000 aircraft worldwide, and it's what ultimately pays the bills for a lot of suppliers,
Absolutely.
right? And that's where the profit
Yeah.
margins are. Yeah.
I mean, I went to, as I said, with AIM conferences. That's where I met you or saw you present several times already, as well as your partner, Richard Abulafia, that also presented. And it was very interesting to hear that the aerospace industry as a whole is looking for more and more suppliers. You said that it's one of the bottlenecks that you have in the industry, that you don't have enough suppliers. And there was a statistic that was said at one time, and I can't remember who said it, that if Boeing would bring out a new airline this year, we would not have enough spindles in the US to manufacture the parts for that particular aircraft. I mean, that's just staggering, the amount of work for shops that are out there to get involved in the aerospace industry. Um, what do you say to this?
Yeah. So the industry is a smaller world than most people think. And when you dig into the weeds and I guess see the perspective that we do, there's a lot more sole source positions than you may realize. Down to specific fasteners on aircraft that, just a few weeks ago, actually in February, there was a big fire at a plant at a facility called SPS in just outside Philadelphia. And immediately there was a lot of concern in the industry over whether that could shut down some parts of Boeing production, because a lot of these fasteners were highly engineered, intellectually protected by intellectual property, sole source. So if you wanted to, it's not a simple matter of just transferring the manufacturing over to another supplier. It would take, at least a matter of months to stand someone else new up.
So a screw or a bracket, as simple as that, could essentially shut down the airline production for that just because of that one area.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yep. And I'd say generally, yes, that OEMs are definitely open to the conversation about having backup sources of supply and diversify their supply base. And from their perspective, the OEMs are very strategic about their supply chain, of course, and their supply base and their risk exposure. But in many instances, they'll say, we like when our suppliers are diversified across multiple industries and not fully dependent on aerospace. And that way it helps us too. And helps flex the muscles a little bit, and it's not as binary. So we hear that feedback a lot.
We've done multiple studies now over here at Tebis because we're quite passionate about that industry too. When we look at an automotive vehicle, there's roughly about 30,000 parts in an automotive vehicle. If we're looking at an airplane, there's up probably in the 367 plus thousand parts on that particular airline that have to be manufactured in order to create that airline. Now, if we don't have enough suppliers to do this, then of course this entire, and you mentioned earlier when we started talking about this, that there is an overabundance of work for the airline industry and I read somewhere that that Boeing has already orders for the next 10 years already in existence, which means that maybe by the time that I retire, they finally are eating off all of the POs that they've gotten to manufacture these airlines, which is just an enormous amount of work that has to go through the pipeline. And I've seen a lot of the mold shops that we deal with and machining shops that, needless to say, the automotive world is a little bit in a lull right now. And some of the mold shops, they're really hurting when it comes to this. So what would be your advice to companies that are in this automotive bubble right now, not having enough work? How could they get engaged with the aerospace industry? And obviously there is enough work there to sustain them with potential work. How do they go about that?
Yeah. Lots of different ways, but I'll maybe boil it down to three. If you're looking to get into existing programs, like let's say you want to go chase work on 737, for example, I think a lot of smaller suppliers maybe jump the gun a little bit and go immediately to the aircraft OEM, like Airbus or Boeing, when that necessarily, at the end of the day, you may not be supplying directly to them. You're more likely to be supplying to one of their tier ones. Kind of, right. It's a similar structure like automotive, right? Mm-hmm. So who are the tier ones in I guess engine OEMs and tier ones? So engine OEMs, you have GE, Pratt, Rolls, and then the tier ones is everyone else making I call it the guts and arteries of the aircraft systems.
Right.
So you have the likes of Collins Aerospace, Honeywell, Parker Aerospace, Eaton Aerospace, and others. Right. And they're the ones integrating the packages and sending those to Boeing for the most part. Mm-hmm. And they're the ones that have their own supply base, of course. Mm-hmm. So my advice is not overlook the tier ones. They may be your customer at the end of the day anyway. The other avenue is, there are kind of new programs in their infancy that I'll talk like advanced air mobility, for example.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of chatter about that. There's a lot of money going into it. We don't think all the programs are going to be viable at the end of the day.
Right.
So there's that disclaimer, but nevertheless, there is money out there funding for development funding,
Mm-hmm.
and suppliers are getting contracts for these platforms, even though
Mm-hmm.
they're pre-production or in their early stages.
Right.
And the other avenue is the military route, and going after Air Force Research Lab contracts and things like that to kind of get that might be a way to get your foot in the door, become more familiar with the industry and the requirements, what type of certifications you need, um, and then you kind of work your way up and graduate into bigger programs, and you prove yourself
Right.
along the way because that history and that history of delivery and performance is crucial as you build your rap sheet in the aerospace industry.
Right. Let me pivot quickly to obviously in the automotive sector, we have a lot of trends that are going on right now with the electric battery and all that kind of stuff that's going on. Is there things going on in the aerospace industry that you can say, yeah, this is a trend too that we're seeing in the electrification of airlines? Not that I'm imagining that there's an airplane flying in the air with a long extension cord behind them to kind of charge them, but is there any trends like that going on where we're looking at alternative sources for energy production?
Yeah. So if you're specifically on that, you know, we don't think there will be an all electric commercial transport anytime soon. Probably not in our lifetime. The battery technology
Hmm.
and power densities are not there yet. But we do see it having good applications at the very low end of the market. So think, up to 10-seat aircraft, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
So not aircraft that are optimally sized for an airline type of operation, but that could certainly be used for private travel or maybe
Right.
some cargo, things like that.
Hmm.
Um, that that definitely has a green light from us in our assessment, at least. But yeah, if you're
Wow.
talking blue sky about airliners, that's a long ways off, if ever.
Okay. So I can still plug in my Apple iPhone in the airliner that I'm traveling with and not sucking the energy for traveling out of it. So that's good.
Exactly. Yeah. But on the airliners, today it's all about the engine technology. That's going to determine the timing and what the ultimate design will look like for whatever next clean sheet aircraft comes out from Airbus or Boeing or whoever. Um, because we're just at a point in engine technology where we're really pushing the limits on the materials and the temperatures and pressures we can achieve. So
Hmm.
now there are some unconventional designs being evaluated, like open rotors, which is basically a jet engine, but take the nacelle off the front on the fan. And then you just have a giant fan and very efficient
Hmm.
and a very hot core. That gives you a really good bypass ratio. So that's one of the avenues being evaluated
Wow.
on airliners.
Interesting. I mean, obviously, the airline industry is, I would consider, a fairly young industry. I mean, the kind of industry that we have seen, or the technology that has progressed over the last, I would say, 30 to 40 years, has been enormous. Of the amount of technology that went into it, from, if we're just looking alone at the engine manufacturing, going from props into jet engines, and seeing all of that kind of develop right in front of our eyes.
Absolutely. And even within jet engines, there's probably a dozen other enablers that have led to today's current jet engines. You have, just to get to composite fan blades was a huge hurdle. And
Right.
then I'd say over the last 20 years, the focus has been more on making the core hotter. So that high pressure turbine,
Yeah.
how do you make it hotter? Well, you need more exotic metals and materials. Um, Things like titanium aluminide, more ceramic matrix composites in the core, things like that.
Yeah.
So we've had to get really creative, and the industry definitely wants to keep the track record going of, showing consistent improvement in fuel efficiency over time, which
Right.
they've been doing ever since its inception.
Yeah, the exotic materials when it comes to manufacturing or the machining environment that we are in is quite enormous. I mean, almost every single time I talk to an aerospace manufacturer that we deal with, there's a new material that came out that is even harder to cut, and it gives us even more challenges from the manufacturing side, which is interesting to see that those materials are coming out. And usually those materials are not cheap.
No, not at all. And I mean, there tends to be bursts of development like on one specific platform. Like, the 787 was a huge leap forward in terms of use of composites, right? And then now we're dealing with the A320neo and the Max, which is more of a leap forward in terms of the engine technologies.
Right.
The 787 also was a pioneer in more electric systems on the aircraft, so not excluding the propulsion. So yeah, there'll definitely be future advancements on whatever comes next too.
Right. So we only talked uh, about one area of the aerospace industry, which is new construction. But there's an entire area that not many people are looking at, which is the MRO, or the the maintenance, repair, and overhaul sector, which is a huge segment of the aerospace industry. Would you agree?
Absolutely. For airlines alone, spend about $120 billion a year on
Wow.
maintenance. So that's labor and spare parts and
And all of
repairs.
those
Yeah.
parts is because, well, obviously a lot of the airplanes that we have in the sky, they have been already living in there for the last 15, 20 years. Parts break down, they wear out, engines have to be continuously replaced, or the fans have to be replaced and stuff like that. All of those have to be manufactured by somebody that is willing to do that kind of work. So uh, would you say that companies shouldn't only look at the new airplane construction or the new business, but also looking at the MRO type of environment to get some additional business in?
Yep. Suppliers can definitely be a source of parts manufacturing to feed spare parts demand. We've seen suppliers migrate into doing actual repairs as well. So they set up a shop, and yeah, it's the the aftermarket is the lifeblood of the entire industry. It's where the profit margins are, and
Absolutely.
it's what feeds the research and development budgets for the entire industry. It's why we can even be talking about
Right.
potential next aircraft and next engines. Um,
Yeah. We've been going to the MRO Americas for the last 3 years in a row. I think this year it is back in Atlanta, Georgia, in that facility, and it is absolutely mind blowing the size of that particular exhibition. I think it's happening April 8th to the 10th that it's happening, but it's just enormous, and almost, and I would say not almost, but every airplane manufacturer, along with the smaller shops, either for wiring or for machining capabilities or for composite, they're all there. And it's just an amazing spectacle to see of all the technology that is in one place, all looking at the repair and overhaul and the
Absolutely.
maintenance
Yeah.
of
And
airlines.
the aftermarket overall is just very hot right now because, what did we just talk about a few minutes ago? It's how Airbus and Boeing can't deliver aircraft fast enough, right? So, what are airlines doing to cope with that? Well, they're keeping their older aircraft around longer. That means they're spending more on maintenance than they
Right,
expected, and it's actually becoming a bigger part of their cost structure. They're not necessarily happy about it, but they just something they have to live with.
right. So we only looked at the North American market, and we just talked only about that right now. But what about the global aspect? Europe, for example. I've been talking to some of my counterparts over in Europe, if that's in England or in Portugal or Spain or Italy or wherever. they seem to be in an uptick on global aerospace. And also, Airbus is looking at some of their areas that is close by to France and all that kind of stuff. Do you see also the same kind of excitement and uptick in this aerospace industry over there as well as we see here, or do we see that the U.S. is kind of leading in all of this aerospace manufacturing area?
So yeah, the industry is global for sure, but the supply chain is highly concentrated to North America and Europe.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say for the most part, the European supply chain is riding the same tailwinds that the U.S. is in terms of demand for commercial aircraft, things like that. I think maybe a couple small differences is European supply chain is more highly exposed to Airbus. I'd say, Airbus has an edge on Boeing in some areas, like on narrow body aircraft. The A321 is outselling the 737 MAX, but Boeing has an edge on wide bodies, where that's historically been their strength.
Mm-hmm.
The other area is, we've heard about some elements of the European supply chain facing a little bit of strain because they took on, COVID era loans that now they're coming up on, they have to pay it back. So it's, creating a little bit of challenges around working capital, but that just means that may present an investment opportunity for, private equity firms who may be able to play a greater role in European suppliers going forward. And the other aspect is in defense, since Europe disarmed after the fall of the Berlin Wall, there hasn't been nearly the same kind of defense supply chain in Europe as there has been in North America. But now that, because of,
Right.
political discussions going on and an increasing expectation that Europe takes on more of its own defense, I think there's tailwinds for an opportunity there in Europe for more defense-oriented suppliers and growth there.
So you would say that there is probably, because of some of the directions that have been set for Europe, there's also going to be an increased growth when we look at aerospace as well as defense type of manufacturing over in Europe.
Correct. Yeah, I'd say commercial has already been healthy outlook aside from all the constraints we talked about, but they're probably facing bigger opportunities on defense than the U.S. is.
Would you say that in terms of looking at the supply chain, I mean, we said earlier that this is a struggle, or at least over here in North America, finding enough suppliers to manufacture. Do we feel that the North American theater over the European theater is in a better spot with the supply chain, or does Europe have a better supply chain for the manufacturing? What's your feeling when it comes to that?
I think there are maybe broader sources of capital in the U.S., which always helps. I just see more private equity activity here. Not to say that couldn't be replicated more overseas as well.
Well, what I'm getting at, and we've been doing a lot of studies in the aerospace market, especially with AIEM, and I looked at a chart from 2022 with the top AS 900 states for the aerospace part manufacturing. And I was amazed. Michigan, currently where we are located, at least in 2022, we had a 13% growth rate in the aerospace market. Now, when I looked at, of course, the California as being the number one state with over 2,125 companies in growth, that's just amazing to see that that particular state has such an interest in sprouting new companies up to assist in the aerospace manufacturing area. And that's absolutely, but looking at our neighboring states like Ohio or Wisconsin area or Illinois, there's also there's a renewed interest in that particular industry.
Absolutely. I mean, we tell people all the time, it's a part of the country that really deserves more attention for aerospace exposure. I mean, just the technical legacy we have here in Michigan with automotive, that can translate very easily over to aerospace. I guess the challenges are different. You're going from relatively low speed to high speed, and you have to care more about weight and being lightweight in aerospace, of course. But yeah, we think there's a lot of overlap there, a lot of engineering talent, graduate University of Michigan, and there's plenty of other high quality schools in the area and the state too. And people ask us all the time, well, why is an aerospace consulting firm based in Michigan and not in Seattle or something? And we're like, well, actually, there's over 900 companies in Michigan that have some sort of exposure to aerospace, and there's a lot of sub-tier suppliers in the region. And it's not the first names you think about, but there's a
Right.
lot of opportunity and exposure.
Not a lot of people realize that the aerospace industry in Michigan, it has grown quite a bit since the last 10 years, and especially in an area where you don't think there's a lot going on. And I'm talking about the UP, of course. They're having quite a bit of space focused manufacturing up in the UP.
Yep. Right.
Obviously, when we think about the UP, we think of 10 feet of snow, and that's about it. But what attracts companies to manufacture space type related areas in the UP, or to come to Michigan and do it there?
No, that is a good question. I don't know if I can speak to whether it's something unique about the UP. I think that OEMs are always looking for entrepreneurial suppliers who approach a problem differently or more efficiently, and I think it keeps them fresh. Perhaps that's just part of the country they hadn't looked at closely enough before, and now they're seeing a lot of good investment opportunities.
Well, I also see a lot of the experienced individuals that came out of the automotive industry. I have a lot of friends that decided, you know what, I've had enough of this life that we have down here. They move up to the UP and now trying to find work up there. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, where this is a, a part of the country where it's still a little bit of the hidden gem of what's going on. But aerospace industry is growing at a very rapid rate. I've seen at least three companies that I deal with that were predominantly just automotive mold and have gone into the aerospace world and are making quite a bit of a difference.
Yeah, I believe it.
Is there any advice that you can give to some of the manufacturers about the outlook for 25 or 26? And should they go towards aerospace and do some of the work there? Can you give some advice to some of our listeners that are listening to this episode?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of opportunity in the aerospace industry. All tailored to your individual company's goals, of course. Like we said before, not everyone wants to or is cut out to be a pure play supplier in aerospace. There's trade-offs to all sorts of approaches. I'd say do your research in terms of the platform outlooks, know what you're getting into. There is, aerospace is known for having a bit of a longer certification roadmap, right? So it's not a matter of getting in and starting work tomorrow. It does take quite a bit of time, relationship building, and investment. So a bit of patience needed. But that's part of the reason why the industry is as safe as it is because there's a lot of vetting that goes on, and people have to prove themselves as they work themselves up the chain. But overall, I'd say the other point I'd make is when we look at investment opportunities for clients and having the right platform mix and positions really stands out on an investor book. If you're an owner out there, like this is something to consider for diversifying your business and showing, even if it doesn't even end up being a big chunk of your business, that hey, we're investing in an Aero because we want to enhance our capabilities and see what we can learn and apply to our other end markets.
How can companies, just a final thought, reach out to you should they need any, or to your consulting firm to get some of that insight or advice or anything like that? What would you say to have them guide to?
Yep. If you'd like to get in touch with our firm, you can send a message through our website at aerodynamicadvisory.com.
Awesome. Mike, it was a real pleasure to have you on the podcast. I wish you safe travels in the sky. Obviously, I have to assume you're still flying and you're enjoying that feeling, what you're doing. But if you're up there, be safe and come safely back down again.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Well, my friends, you heard it here first. The aerospace industry is growing. The manufacturing is growing for that particular industry. Get to that industry now. Get involved in that particular industry because it can make your company switch from no business to being so overloaded with work that you can't help yourself. And wouldn't that be a lovely sight to see? If you have the machine sitting there, instead of sitting idle, get involved in that industry. Space is growing, aero is growing, defense is growing. So get involved. That should be my final advice to you in making a difference when it comes to this. And maybe we get to a point where if Boeing comes out with a new airplane today, that we have enough spindles in the U.S. that can manufacture every single part of that particular airplane in record speed. Wouldn't that be a sight to see? With that said, we hope that you enjoyed this particular episode of the All Access podcast. We hope we found that you found our discussions insightful as well as valuable, and that you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to subscribe it on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts and listen to us. Feel free to share your episode with your network. Leave us a review if you'd like. For more updates, follow us on Instagram, X, and LinkedIn. Until next time, keep shaping the future of manufacturing. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for joining this episode of All Access. Please leave a comment or review with your feedback or what you'd like to hear in future episodes. To learn more about manufacturing technology solutions and Tebis's capabilities, visit our website at Tebis. That's TEBIS.com.